Okay, grounded practice and global reach, which in case you didn't know is why you're here. It's a very beautiful poetic title that was given to us by the art team. But what does it actually mean? Grounded practice means work that is accountable to place, accountable to land, to history, to material realities, and to the communities whose knowledge it draws from. It means design that knows where it comes from and knows who it comes from. Global reach, on the other hand, is about influence. It's about visibility, scale, economic viability, the ability to move across borders and shape cultural contexts and conversations that aren't in our immediate context. The tension and the opportunity lies in balancing accountability to place and ambition for reach. And as anyone who knows me personally will know, I'm very ambitious for this design industry and art industry, but it has real lived realities that we have to grapple with and have to be honest with if we're going to be able to overcome them. So this is what this conversation is about. It's about building practices that are deeply rooted and globally relevant. Practices that do not flatten culture to travel, but they carry their specificity as they move. To be clear, just for the context of this conversation, we will chat a bit about tradition and how we lean on tradition, but tradition is not static. It evolves, it adapts, it absorbs pressure. It is not reference material to be sampled. It is a knowledge system, a social technology that has been shaped through lived reality. So as this shift towards designers who are gaining more and more recognition due to their rooted practices, as this starts to get more and more prominence, we do have to interrogate it. We have to ask why now? Who's asked for this? Who resisted it before? And when global knowledge becomes a global commodity, who retains authorship? Who profits and who carries the risk? And last thing for me, we have to be careful because language, the thing that we're doing up here, blowing hot air all about this, can soften the responsibility. Big words can hide imbalances. So we are all very conscious of that. We're sharing our personal opinions and our personal journeys here, but being careful not to gloss over other people's journeys and add. Right, so with that, Francis, I'm going to start with you. We're speaking about land-based intelligence, essentially, and how do we use that and pay homage to it. Ways of making that are shaped by climate, about scarcity, survival, and community. What does sustainability mean when you and your practice and others are accountable to land and animals, not to trends?
Hi, thank you. We'll try our best for you to hear. Thanks, Bielle. I think sustainability we all have fatigue around that word. It gets used very often, and I'm certainly not going to try and define it for you or any other practice. But for me, I think it really comes about having respect for what you do and, like you said, understanding the ecosystem that what you do comes from, the materials, where it comes from, and that practice. And then leaving that ecosystem in a little bit of a better position than where you found it. And I really think that for me, the sustainability behind that can only be achieved when you understand things from their roots, from the materials, from this like very guttural land up approach, instead of our current obsession with collection down. I think that removes us completely from what really matters and where it comes from and who was involved in that process. And to tell my story, you know, I grew up as very lucky as a little girl in a Karoo farm, farming with Mohair goats. And I desperately wanted to get the hell out of there to experience this world of art and fashion and textiles. And my dad used to laugh at me and say, I needed to come spend more time with him in the veld, in the rangelands, to understand where fabrics came from. And at the time I was like, you have no idea, Dad, just... But this is the primary reason why we ended up making the studio, in that I don't believe that circular, sustainable ecosystems start in our studio. The process for us starts with rainfall. and the ecosystem of desert plants, and the role of herdsmen and farmers and soil, and the importance of having happy and healthy animals in order to produce a good quality fiber. And only then do you go into opening, washing, spinning, dyeing, until finally, that yarn ends up on the loom. And when you make like this, and you know the time and the skill needed to get from that rain to your fabric, it's impossible just to make and make. You become very respectful as to creating timeless pieces that we hope have value in themselves. And I think that if you're not connected to this at a very guttural level, and you don't know the skills and actors and time taken to make your product, then I do think that us as human beings completely remove ourselves from the responsibility for what we do with these sustainability facts, figures, and languages, and we simply shift the blame onto a system instead of taking responsibility for what we do, why we make, and those choices.
Yeah, I think that's the epitome of design at the moment. It's not just creating the product at the end of it, it's taking responsibility for all the decisions along the way and the outcome, just if anyone wants to chime in as we're going, I'm just going to keep on. Your work demonstrates sustainability and not as an add-on, because I think so often sustainability, as you know, we have this fatigue around it and we kind of slap a sticker on afterwards and make it a marketing campaign. But for you, it's more as a chain of custodianship. And I think part of this whole discussion is about how do we move from consumers and just making stuff to actual custodians of our design language and our design industry. So how do you balance what you were just speaking now, traceability, scale, but then with affordability without compromise? Because at some point, compromises happen with our values. We all have these lofty, high values that we want to do, but at some point, the pressure means that some things have to give.
It's a really difficult journey, and you have to ask yourself that question multiple times a day. But I think, like what you were saying, the world doesn't need more stuff, no matter how beautiful, but we certainly need creativity and art and design. We need to fix a problem. We in this room need to use our creativity to fix a problem, and in the textile industry, there's a huge problem. So for me, to answer that question, I have to look at what is in front of me and not try and emulate what others think we should be doing in terms of scale or product. That's really important. So a lot of the time people would say to me, you can't do art and homeware and fashion. That diminishes the value of your art textiles. But what I know is that if I just focused on one, fashion, for example, you have fashion companies who come to the farm and say, we want to source mohair from you, but we only work in kid mohair. But if you spend time on the farm, you'll realize kid mohair literally means the first 2 times that goat has a haircut. And it lives for up to 5 or 8 years. My question is, should we as designers or creatives not be asking, because I understand the material, should I not be making product that speaks to the full life cycle of the animal and the environment? And that, I'm very proud of the fact that we're one of the few, probably the only textile studio working in mohair, speaking to the full life cycle of an animal. And we really ask for the material and the skill set, which is not like anywhere else, to determine the product that we end up creating. And when we put the studio together, we have a lot of problems. Actually, globally, there's a lot of problems. And we were very specific into not looking at what we don't have, but to build something that really looked at the skill and the overlooked strength unique to the socio-economic and environmental makeup of the South African textile industry. Like, what do we have? We've got some of the best materials produced under beautiful practices, the only processing houses when it comes to mohair. And even though we don't have a formal technical textile industry, we've got amazing artisans. And I think when you combine this with excellent design, you can produce 1 or 2 pieces that can hold their own on any world stage. And in a time, the rest of you can speak to this too, where the world is asking us to be increasingly transparent, show your process, show your design thinking. When you make like this, it's very liberating because it requires you to think very specifically on your environment and your skill set. And it's so much so that it's impossible for anyone else to replicate that. And it gives you amazing freedom. And I think that that's really what we're looking when you're making it with something that makes sense for you. But as soon as you're talking about scale or value that doesn't belong to you, it's very difficult to justify.
Yeah, it's a good answer and just opens a whole lot of other questions. Okay, Atang, I'm going to you, and I'm going to go the hard one because I know that you'll answer honestly.
Okay.
So as we're getting more and more visibility and creating more visibility for our South African designers and artisans, representation or visibility and exposure, I'm guilty of that for years, being that I'll give you exposure, I can't pay you, but I've done it to you. I know it's a little thing. So all of this without structural change can be very extractive and damaging, in fact. So can you share your thoughts on this and the financial realities of designers and creators who are being given visibility but not structural change?
Hi everyone, thanks for that question, Bill. For me, I've worked with different people in different parts of the continent and also outside, and I've seen that until whoever is the seller understands you as the person who's making and the chain of people that you're linked to, then it becomes really difficult for them to give you what is worth. But you, on the other side, as the person who's making these things, have to say, I work with people that have children, people that work in these conditions, they get these materials in these type of places. You know, I'll give an example. I spent 5 years going back and forth to Lesotho to look for people that can create not just hats, but a specific type of weaving. And with that, when I went the first time, I was really like young and naive, and the ladies that I went to said, we don't want to work with you because you came here and you just offered money. But if you give your money and we spend a month or 2 months working on what you're doing, then we are not tending to our gardens, to our animals, and all these things. And by the time you leave, your money also leaves with. And it's such a short space of time that your money is then spent, that then you've created a break in their chain of life. So then with that, then I had to listen to what they say and understand that the respect that they need is not just about the fiscal in terms of the finance, but who are they, why are they doing this, and where do I belong in this way of working? And then it became a thing of understanding and visually making them part of my journey. And in that way I felt that I'm not extracting. And I also tell them, listen, what I'm doing with you, I'm going to charge this amount because you need to be able to say, when you make this, what are you happy with? So that when I take that work that I've collaborated with you on, and I take it through the border where I pay, and then I take it to another place and I pay, eventually it's going to be this and that price. And in that way, even when they see the last number, which might look like a phone number, then they're not going, hey, you know, this guy ripped us off. And I guess it's those type of things that I've learned along the way, and I try and be, even with the people that are at my current studio, really be open and go, how much do you want to earn per month? Okay, cool. That means that I must teach you enough skills that will get you to be able to be that type of earner. And then when you are in that position, you are also managing yourself. That means that I can go and off and do other things as well. So in that way, the people who you're working with, you're not extracting, you are sharing the value based on what they can do as well. And for me, I feel it needs to be like that in as many places as possible, you know? So the more you share your skills with whoever you're working with, then everybody gets on a space where they feel like what they're getting is what they deserve. And when you're making what you're doing, it's not beating their prices and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that it's not just financial, and that's such a limited understanding of it. It's value and it's worth, and it's how their specific nuanced realities are being affected by the work that you do. And I think that's where often we apply like a Western model to things and say it's just money. It's not. It's so much more nuanced and important that we actually look at under the bonnet, essentially. Do you want to tell me about your pants?
This is also something that I liked about the journey of these pens. These are by Lucanium Dingy. I'll just stand to show. Hey. So he's a designer, an artist, and he creates the design of the pants. And then he went to Ghana, where the threads were made from, understood how they make it and all these type of things. And then the next part of the journey took him to Senegal. And when he got there, that's when they actually put them together, because they have a specific way of putting things together. And then they came to Cape Town. And it's basically like the journey I'm saying, you go to one place and you understand what they do, how they do it really well. You get to the next place until you actually create an ecosystem that actually works in terms of what the output is. But whoever you go to, everybody has their part to play. And I think then that creates a beautiful value. So even the end user understands what they're getting. It's not just you sitting in your office typing out something on CAD or whatever Photoshop thing that you use, and then you have something, We all have a value. Even the fly that comes and sits on your food for that 5 seconds, there's something it's going to create. God made all these type of things so that there must be part of an ecosystem.
But within that, what happens when any of those things are removed or detached from the story? Because it's similar to your materials. When they are detached from the story behind it, do they lose value? How do we keep the story and the essence, what you're explaining now? I've seen those plans. I didn't know any of that, and it gives it so much of the value is in the storytelling. And when we are exporting our design and art, what is lost in translation? What do we choose to translate? What would you refuse to translate as well? Because sometimes we have to over-explain to have value. Or I think you were telling me you had an installation that had mud, and it was an exhibition. Somebody was telling me the story, but it was an incredible exhibition. But the value was in the art and the making, not in the mud. But when that story was detached, there was a trauma, actually, to be honest.
Well, I think, Atang, when you're explaining the pants and the process and where they came from, the value remains, whether they're made in Ghana or Lesotho or Japan. I think that the problem of where materials that are removed, and we're talking or educating, like today is important, is when the stories aren't being told. So, for example, we work in Mohair, and hardly anyone knows that it's a South African fiber. We produce 60% of the global supply. And the reason we don't know is because 80% of the global supply then leaves our country in a raw form, going into the rest of the fashion supply chain. So little is done here to beneficiate or build our own textile story. And I think that the big problem in textiles, unlike art or architecture or actually any other profession, is you're only a master of your craft when you understand materials, where they come from, and in textiles, that's hardly ever spoken about. Mainly because people don't want to talk about where they come from or how they were made. But, you lose value because we should be like chefs, where if you're extraordinary, you understand the ingredients of your fabrics, you understand seasonality and all of these things. But, and the example I want to give is I was teaching a fashion course in Florence to amazing fashion students. And they stopped me halfway through and they said, sorry, what is a herdsman and how do you spell that? And for me, I'm just like, herdsmen are probably one of the most important actors and skilled in our value chain. I mean, anyone can claim to be a designer or an artist, in my opinion. You might be average or you might be brilliant. Very few people can claim to be a herdsman. It requires a deep understanding of nature and animals. And if we don't know these stories of where things come from and what our decisions as creatives or consumers mean to a long line of skills or actors who came before, how do we know if we don't even know a herdsman exists as designers, let alone they are dependent on our decisions? And that's when I think it becomes dangerous and why it's so important to talk about provenance and where things come from.
I'm not going to link that very elegantly, but I'm coming for you now. You bring a very important and often missing perspective to this discussion because you are here representing institutional power and visibility. So working under one of Africa's most powerful platforms that is both commercially and cultural, you are understanding how narratives are being shaped, which voices are being amplified, you knowing how local design is being packaged for a global audience, you watching that and are complicit in it in a very good way, and I can say that because you're doing it very beautifully. What is the responsibility that large platforms have as patrons and as investors in the creative economy?
Hi guys, can you hear me? All right, cool. It's a big question. I think that for me, like what got me into where I am now can you hear me? Awesome, hello. Institutions, I mean, right now there is like a lot of distrust on institutions. Institutions are no longer like this single source of power or this guiding light where, you know, we all look to this institution to tell us what to do next or to tell us this is the move that we should make. And I think the institutions that will not only remain relevant but will survive are those that get that. Like, you don't actually need to be the voice in every room. You don't actually need your story to lead first. And I think the role that institutions or platforms have, especially large ones, is that we need to actually start de-risking for creative entrepreneurs, because we can speak about provenance. And I think for me, the interesting part is because it's extended beyond like one particular medium. So we work in food, in art, in design, and then there's also the ecological elements of nature. The whole purpose behind the Waterfront when it was created was to connect people and citizens to the ocean. Like, as a baseline, that was the reality. And then tailing from that, like for the past 13 years and some change, the purpose has been collectively, and every word here matters. So I agree with you in terms of the importance of language. So what we all know as people who work there, who collaborate, who partner, is collectively inspiring the world's most, collectively creating the world's most inspiring waterfront neighborhood. How do you actually put value to each and every one of those words? Collectively means we, and the we is not the accountant, the we is the maker, and it's you also understanding what process do they get to in order to get to that retail element. And through that, I think it's around like creating platforms that are sustainable. And I'm using that word knowing that it's a buzzword, but what I mean by sustainability now is that at the core, people are not creating for fun. Some people are creating from a survival aspect. There's creating to express, but at the end of the day, every single artist, every single maker, every single designer, every single artisan needs to actually, put food on the table. They need to keep their practices alive. So within that understanding, you then start trying to figure out what does impact actually mean. And so for me, ultimately, it then means that when you de-risk, it means that you actually invest not only in exposure, but like cash content money, and obviously there are limitations because there's corporate guidelines and whatnot, but at the end of the day, I do think that like the actual cash investment element of it does matter, but not just from a funding point of view, but the process. A good example is a couple of years ago, about 8 years ago, we went on a journey called Joy from Africa to the World. So that's an example of us like packaging, an African story and telling it to the globe. It's sure, we've worked with like over, 300 crafters and designers, more than thousands of actual artisans benefited, but it wasn't a thing of saying, hey guys, just do this. We actually went on a journey that changed the whole makeup of the organization and the institution. And I think that's where transformation truly happens, when you're not only having this like transactional relationship, but there's actually understanding of what does it take to get here, and there's also understanding of like what does the bead, the bead maker and the wire sculptor, what materials do they use to actually get to an end product? How does a falter and a person who actually then creates this grand installation work together to then create something that people can understand? And it wasn't necessarily well received. So institutions also have to have the ability to keep reiterating the message. So taking a stand, essentially. So for us, we took a stand because, you know, there's the reality of place where in Africa it's hot, and it's, you know, for us, December, summer, Christmas, it's a hot season, it's not cold, and a lot of like visitors that come to the neighborhood, you know, are tourists. There's also locals, there's local tourism to an extent, and a lot of the feedback that was received initially was around like, where's the Christmas tree, you know? And it's such a big thing of like, you know, the association of the place is that we always expect to see tinsel, which, you know, is not necessarily sustainable, you know, it's not a material that's sustainable, but we had to go on the journey to keep telling the story every single year, and every single year we see things shift. We still have a lot of naysayers who, you know, ask the question of like, but it's not feeling Christmassy. But there's also a lot of people who come back and say, you know, this is inspirational, this is joyous. You not only platforming, you know, a maker from Joburg and a textile person from Cape Town, and they are coming together to create this collaborative offering that is seen by millions of people, in fact. So for me, the role of institutions is to push other voices and platform them, and also be willing to take the risk of actually going more in depth in the engagement. I think if we were to be a little bit more like willing to go there, you actually find that it transforms the institution and the ecosystem in ways that are a bit more productive and sustainable financially, culturally, and you know, yeah.
That's such a good point. I think it's not just a benevolent thing to do. It changes, you know, doing that hard work changes the institution itself. I think in that, so often a lot of institutions want to be demure and quiet about the good work that they're doing, which is fine, it's fair and well, but we also kind of have to name and shame. You kind of want to see like the Waterfront are doing incredible things, they are making mistakes, and that's fine. They're not afraid to admit it. They understand that they're going to have to make those mistakes in order to get progress. That gives permission to other institutions to say like, ooh, I can also build in public, I'm also going to do this, instead of pretending or being too scared to do anything. Because if you don't put your head on a block, we're not going to have structural change either way. So I do commend them. I also just do want to ask you a little bit about the relationship between your tenants and also, well, I mean, you touched on it already, but the people that you are giving visibility are basically in many ways a touch point to the rest of the world, as you're saying in this joy situation. But also how, just if there are any, it's rude, I just want to know the frictions or the bad things, or what that relationship's like.
That one is I smile because like I work in a particular part of the institution that focuses on small business. And one thing that I'll iterate and I always say is that there's nothing small about small businesses. And when I speak about small businesses, I'm not necessarily speaking just about like, oh, you're making X million per, it's literally some of the guys that are within our neighborhood, it's a one-man show, you know, but you're needing to sell to the world, essentially. So there's a partner relationship, I would say, more than it is a traditional landlord-tenant relationship. Obviously, at the end of the month, there is that element of like, there's a rental that we're not going to say that doesn't exist. People are not there for free. But then that also challenges us as an institution to then say, how do we then provide value, like, you know, that justifies even the premium? But when you then think about like the small business side of things, I mean, a lot of the time, the entry or access point for these entrepreneurs is much lower than what it would be either in the main center or even anywhere else in the country. You know, you find someone who's in a little cart, like, and what also keeps it alive for us is the fact that there's constant engagement and there's constant re-looking with the businesses themselves every single month. And I make this example more specifically with the Watershed. A place like the Watershed, there's a monthly, almost interrogation of where is the business at. This is both from like what's happening for them from a sales point of view, what's happening for them from a merchandising point of view. Are there any, you know, human relations elements that are happening that might be contributing to things maybe not working? And those are the realities. And how we then also do things is that we also have accelerators and incubators. So we work quite closely with other organizations like Craft and Design Institutes, work closely with individuals. And that's one of the things that I found so commendable that even made me, because I'm not really a corporate person, but I do think it's important for more creatives and more artists to actually enter these spaces, because the people who are there need people to champion what we're speaking about today.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe I'm running out of time, but
No. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
We have there's left and right brain people,
Yeah.
and it's like when you're trying to explain something to a counter, we need more creative people to be like, let me
Yes.
explain my day-to-day reality and what you're doing for
Exactly.
me, which is really important.
Exactly. Yeah.
I should have started with you because you're a guest to our country. Sorry, it's quite rude. Firstly, Francesca, I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit about what you do. This sounds so rude and very Cape Townian, but we kind of know what we all do. That's terrible. But from what I can tell, your work sits at the intersection of industrial design, anthropology, and very much this idea of collaborative authorship. So maybe if you can briefly share your work, and then we can ask some questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's actually so exciting to be part of this discussion, and I do really appreciate a lot hearing stories of a life cycle of products that is all handled by this care and this empathy with both the animals and the people, and this sense of community that can grow around projects and the making of things. I think is something very relevant also for my practice, even though I don't have a continuous relationship with any craftsman in particular. I was trained as an industrial designer in Politecnico di Milano, and then I did my master studies at the Design Academy in Eindhoven, which is a conceptual design master. And there, most of the designers were actually design artists, so they were producing their collections. Whereas for myself, I really thought that for me, what was important in my practice was the relationship. So I could have never been confronted daily on producing my own things, but what I wanted to be is to become a facilitator. So at the time I went back to Italy, I really thought that I could bring my own view of the world, new questions, a bit of poetry, of whim, of lightness into the industry. And since then, I go on collaborating mostly with Italian brands, but also do some more art-oriented project, but with the same intent as a shared practice together with the people behind the production, so in the factories with the craftsmen, because in the Italian industry is nothing about machinery, but it's still a lot of people with their great expertise working behind it, and with the people of the brand, and the engineers. So I like to think of the creative process as really as a shared experience, as something I don't have a preconceived shape about, but that naturally arises from the process.
So then what does that mean for authorship? Like what does authorship look like in a genuine collaboration? And I'm asking also specifically from, instances like Atang is speaking when he's speaking with communities. I think you can use your blueprints that we could learn from in many ways and share vice versa.
Yeah, I think that authorship has something to do with identity in the way we conceive it as like a signature from someone. But to me, it's really about who I am in the world and the question I manage to ask. So it's not about imposing a presence, but actually about being a lens from outside that come and shine a new light, maybe on a craftsmanship or on a archetypal object or situation, and so really it's about accountability. It's about being responsible for the process, but trying in the meanwhile to understand deeply the context I'm working with, and to try to give back to the situation I'm working within.
You speak about the Italian crafters, and we all, if you conjure up the word "made in Italy," we all know what that means. And I think that one of our deep ambitions and what we're speaking about now is if we were to say "made in South Africa" or "South African art," "South African design," for that to travel and for people to understand what that would mean. And you've just arrived 2 days ago. It's been a whirlwind. What are your first impressions of South African art and design?
It was like I was shocked by the energy. There's so much happening. There's so much texture, so much colors. There's a great energy. I'm really already in love. Like yesterday, I was joking, saying I'm living in South Africa since 2 days, but my family doesn't know it yet. So I'm really glad I managed to see all this. It's a great time of the year, and I'm also trying and pick up the similarities between our production and what's happening here. Actually, it's not so dissimilar. The made in Italy is still very spread out in the countryside, where each of the craftsmen does a little step of the bigger chain. So it's not very dissimilar from your trousers.
I cannot believe how quickly that went because we've just been signaled for time. Is there anything that anyone would like to share? I've got another 17,000 questions for everyone, but anything you've got a burning desire, and I'd also like to know what's in your hand there.
While Atang is, getting ready, I think like to what Francesca's saying, one of the things that we found is that the only true way to be like properly global is actually to focus on the local elements even further. And I think the more we keep actually investing in that, not just as the makers, creators, but institutions, collaborators, partners, is the more, South African design, South African textile, South African art has like this hold that, has the same reverence as made in Italy. And, South Africans have this thing of we only value things once they've gone global. Then when they come back to us, we're like, oh, okay, this is now worth noting. And once we change that, then I think we'll start to see a bit of shift in terms of valuing ourselves, taking it important, seeing it as an important thing for all of the steps in the process for us to then, package that for not only the world, but for us as well.
Yeah, very good point.
Hi. So, this is the preeminent sign of African spiritual high culture. And the top part that looks like a zero represents, firstly, the feminine. And then, can you hold the mic for me while I say? Because I want to show. So, this represents the mother, the father, and the synthesis that come from. And this is about community. And in Lesotho, we call it letsema. Letsema is basically when you work with different people in different places so that no one loses out and everything is inclusive. So, for example, I have people at the gallery, but for me to be able to make the price of what eventually gets to the gallery, I need to have their considerations. And I look at things in that way. So this also represents spirit, mind, and matter. It represents water that rises up to become clouds, down as rain, to nurture the ground so that the seeds and plants can grow. And this is something that is very matriarchal. And I feel the world that we're in today, if we have more of this type of thinking, there won't be any sort of wars and all these things that are there. And people will actually see themselves as part of a community and not in a singular way. And so for me, I look at this and I say, as people who are on this continent, we need to be able to come into a community where we understand each other and not say, as an ego, this is who I am. I don't need to have a PhD to be who I am. I need to be able to say, this is my role and this is how I can share my life with whoever it is. And so I'm quite surprised that many people don't know this. So I hope that today everybody learns. It is called the Ankh, A-N-K-H.
All right, I'm going to wrap up quickly. So I think what we've picked up or trying to... Hello, Margot, you're late. Design cannot produce objects just for markets. It has to also protect the systems, cultural, social, ecological, that make those objects possible. And if we are serious about plurality, which we didn't touch on enough, basically this idea that meaning more than one way of knowing, more centers of influence, to have diversity and plurality, then we cannot build global success by packaging difference and selling it back to the world, which I think you're touching on, Star. Many indigenous and community-based practices hold ecological intelligence because they were shaped in long-term relationship with the land, scarcity, and real consequence, which we discussed. That knowledge is not romantic, it is practical, and it is contemporary. So grounding, what we're speaking about, having a grounded practice, is not just a branding exercise. It must be a commitment from on all of our behalf and on institutions. Wow. It means sharing of authorship, sharing profit, sharing risk. It means investing in communities, not just extracting inspiration from them. It means redesigning contracts and supply chains and credit structures and all the boring stuff that I have to do on my day-to-day now. It's not just about aesthetics. And that's what structural change looks like. The delicate task to remain rooted without becoming rigid, to scale without stripping context, to collaborate without consuming, and to gain visibility without erasing the hands that made the work possible. So with that, I'm going to open up to the floor to answer any questions. Otherwise, we'll just keep on talking. Thank you so, well, I'm sure it might come up, but thank you to each one of you. There's still time if you want to share anything.
I think the closing was very strong as it was.
Okay. Well, we'll also all hang around afterwards if you do want to. It's very also always nerve-wracking putting your hand up and asking a question. So we'll crash around here, I'm sure, for a few minutes if you want to chat to anyone specifically. Minna, I have to tell you, I've never talked on a conference that has been so well organized and thoughtfully done, and the caliber of the guests that you've chosen. These conversations are very powerful, but you made it very easy and a joy to be part of. So I'm so impressed. Well done.
Thank you so much, Bielle. That's very, very kind and very flattering to hear. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much, actually, to you guys, to our panelists. That was a seriously enriching conversation, and I think we all feel very lucky to have witnessed that and hear what you have to say. You guys are all powerhouses of information. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And again, thank you so much to the Fair for hosting us, to iTOO for supporting, and the Italian Consulate for your support. And thank you to everyone here. Please enjoy the rest of your day.